I'm Bryan Cranston, and you're listening to the Pantheon Network.
Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and holy shit, I can't believe it's happening. Welcome to the all-new Season 7 of Music Is Not a Genre, MxG. Pretty sloppy hand gestures because it's been a while since I've done this. We are finally back after a bit of a delay. I'm honestly astonished that we're here for so many reasons. This year has been insane, but I'm very excited for all of us that there is a Season 7 and that this is Episode 1, and I am starting it off with a bang. But we will get to that in a second. First of all, of course, thank you as always for watching and listening. If you are just listening, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre and you get a video for every single episode of this podcast. If you are watching, hello, do you see my shirt? This is something from my merch store. You can go to nickdimatteo.com and click shop and get that and so many other items, but you can also go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre and you can just listen to this if you'd rather not see my lovely attire or anything else in this room. And, of course, patreon.com/musicisnotagenre if you'd like to support this podcast and get the bonus episodes, among other things. And you're going to want the bonus episode for this topic. And I will tell you why when we get there. And what's the topic? All right, get ready. Like I said, I'm starting this off with a bang. So please, if there's any sensitive people in the room, have them leave. 3, 2, 1. Hey, assholes. Music is not a generation either. So, yeah, I'm kicking it off with a real gut punch to some people out there, and there's a reason for that, and of course I'll get to those reasons. This is also Music is Everything number 33, so that's my sub-series where I take a topic that's not related to one specific artist or kind of music, and I dissect it, and that's what I'm doing here. So, what's happening? First of all, with the new season, I've got a few new things. I'm kind of flying solo on this, video-wise yet again, and hopefully that's working for everybody. I hope you're enjoying it. I also have a new mid-roll, which I think you'll enjoy, of course, halfway through every episode. That's what a mid-roll is. A little bit of promo there. I have a new teaser, both on YouTube and on the streaming services. It's a much shorter teaser, kind of cuts to the chase of what this podcast is about. If you're just joining me and you're like, why is this guy talking like this? The teaser's a great place to start. And I have a new sponsor. It's a music service called Qobuz, spelled Qobuz. It was a French music platform that was launched in 2007. Of course, it's now available here in the States. It offers streaming and downloading of over 100 million high-res tracks, editorial content, plus liner notes, interviews, and more. It takes a boutique record shop approach to music, so if you miss the days of CDs, cassettes, and vinyl, this is for you. It's a full package. It's on iOS and Android, and it's about the same price as Spotify or Apple Music per month. I haven't tried it yet, but I plan to check out, first of all, Rex music on it soon, my music, as well as do research for some of the future episodes here and see what Qobuz is all about, especially because I like that it's higher quality sound files, and I like that it has all of those extra perks like liner notes and interviews and things like that attached to the artists and all of the things they release. That's my pitch. You're going to hear it in one way or another every episode. So why start the Season 7 with, hey, assholes? Why start with this topic and why that title? Yeah, it's provocative. It's to the point. It's riffing on the podcast name. Music is not a genre. Music is not a generation. I try to break down divides. I try to not create a sense of camaraderie through division. And that's kind of what this entire episode is going to be about. The dollar signs in the graphic were deliberate, of course, both for the algorithm so that it doesn't get flagged as a bad word, because we here in America, we get, a little hinky about bad words when they're said out loud. Oh, my goodness. And the other reason the dollar signs were deliberate is because I think people who traffic in what I'll call aggressive nostalgia or dividing older from younger or genre from genre are mostly doing it for the cash grab. It's an easy way to drum up a base through a sense of indignation or anger or music. This kind of music is better, or music was better when. And I'm kind of talking to both the purveyors of this and to the fans of this. I'll try to be nice, but I am an opinionated person. Also, I needed this kind of starter episode because, like I said, it's been really super nuts. I've been doing gigs with 6 different bands over the last couple of months and audio editing for now 3 other podcasts that I'm working on, and a bunch of voiceover work and so many other things that I couldn't quite get to it. And I needed a break. Couple of things. I'm not going to name names. There are a couple of podcasters or YouTube personalities that kind of caused me to want to do this episode, but I won't name names, partly because I don't know them. I'm sure they're wonderful people and they do know their stuff and they do great shows. I just happen to disagree with where they come from and how they do it and all of that. And I had some jokes in there that I'm not going to say, but I will say this: patreon.com/music is not a genre bonus episode for this podcast. I will name names. I'll tell you exactly who I'm talking about and why they piss me off, but not here, because we're all trying to get by. We're all trying to do something like this. But let's just say this: they're basically old white dudes, like me. Some might say, I don't know. Though all of us are prone to these kinds of divisions to one degree or another, including me. There are ways in which I get indignant about certain things in the music world or outside of the music world that might cause me to create a division within myself, and then worse, between me and other people or a perceived group of people. And I get that. We are all prone to it. It's humanity. We pick our sides a little too much, and it's just what we do. And that said, specifically this topic, Music is Not a Generation, is talking about how way too many people live in the past. And here's the thing: future tripping and nostalgia, neither one of those actually exists, because you cannot live in the past and you can't live in the future. You can only live in the now. So if most of your pleasure in life comes from either imagining what your life could be in the future or wanting to go back to a period that you think was better, even though we tend to block out the bad stuff in favor of the good, which is a nice coping mechanism, but it's false, then you are not living in the present moment. You're not getting the most out of life. I've said this in other episodes in kind of a micro way. This entire episode is kind of about that. So it's going to go over, here's the rundown for the episode. I'm going to go over some planned topics for the season and use them as jumping off points to explore why generational bias sucks. Sucks ass. Hey, by the way, for those of you watching, you see the wreath there? Now, why do you think I put that shape behind me as part of the display in an episode with the name that I gave it? I don't know. Use your imagination. This year, by the way, since it's this first episode of the year, it's going to build on my desire to put more of myself into these podcasts. If you've been following me since season 1, you've noticed that I've been doing that. And this is why I'm starting off this way and kicking it off. I'm going to throw in more of my opinions and do my best to prove their efficacy with facts and history and evidence and all of that stuff. Sources. So sources for this, very few. BrooklynVegan.com, sure. LouderSound.com and Wikipedia. And that's about it, because this is not very much of a fact-based episode. I did some of the disclaimer up there, and again, I will say this is not against people who love older music, who prefer older music. We all have that. There's certain music from the 80s and 90s in particular, even 2000s, that I prefer, and I get that. This is also not to say, again, that those people out there, podcasters, who are trafficking in nostalgia are doing a bad thing, objectively speaking. But breaking those two disclaimers down, this is about people who are so aggressive in saying that they love older music that they do it to the detriment of newer music, that they put down newer music. And the same with the podcasters. If what you're doing is seeking to say that music was somehow inherently better, not just that you like it better, but that it was inherently better, then I'm talking to you. Okay, whether you're a fan or a podcaster. So let's get to some topics that I might be covering in the first part of this year. I don't know if I will or not, but I believe so. This one I know for sure because I've already prepped 2 upcoming episodes. There are a few episodes left in my series on albums. What's an album and why? There are, I believe, 3 more episodes I have planned, and that is coming up next week after, and I think then I'll skip and then I'll do the last one some point down the line. I'm already up to the 2010s. I'm doing it by decade, just in case you weren't sure. I started with a prehistory in the 1950s. And then I did 1 in the 60s, 1 in the 70s, 2 in the 80s, 2 in the 90s, 2 on the 2000s. I have planned 2 on the 2010s. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it proves that I am super against generationism, or whatever you want to call it, generationalism. You can find the word that is correct. And I think it proves that that kind of thinking is bullshit. And it's because if you're following along with this series, first of all, it ties right into the whole music is not a genre thing, which is, A, I'm not sticking to one decade, and B, I'm not sticking to one type of music. I don't just go over all the great rock music of the 1970s. I'm doing rock and R&B and hip hop and all the different kinds of subgenres and electronic and all of that stuff. And I do that for every decade. It's surveying albums that were released, top albums, debut albums, notable albums from those years of that decade. And what I've found is that there is something to love in every single decade and pretty much every single year. Now, I might be unusual. I know for most of the people I know, most of every age, of almost every age, I would say probably every age, they have not just favorite albums and artists, which we all do, but they stick to kind of one or a couple or maybe 3 or 4 types of music, and usually from 1 or 2 eras, let's say. It's not that they're not open. Some aren't, but most do not venture further than that. It makes me unusual because I can't stop discovering music, whether it's old music I've never heard or new music, partly because I make music, and my music is not, hey, this is what I sounded like in the 90s or 2000s or even 2010s. This is what I sound like now because I am constantly absorbing music and allowing that to infiltrate what I do. And also it expands not just my knowledge, but my appreciation, and it allows me to love more. And that's one of the things I'm trying to promote here, not division, but connection and love of music, of whatever. And I've been open to that my entire life. There have been a few dips here and there. It happens, you get exhausted. But I got to say, it's not as hard as you think to keep up with music, and it's not as hard as you think to discover music from any era. And I think that's what this album by decade is proving. I can say without a doubt that the mix of quality and genres have been the same. That mix has been the same for about 50 years, let's just say, ever since electronic music became a thing. Sure, there have been other genres, subgenres that have popped up in the last 50 years, but pretty much the landscape of music has been very similar in all of those decades. And I would say that mix and that quality, the overall awesome music, good music, terrible music, everything has always existed. There's no such thing as a heyday was one of the episodes of this podcast. Search it. Music is not a genre. There's no such thing as a heyday. You'll love that. If you love this episode, you're going to love that one. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this relating to the main reason why I'm talking about this topic in this episode, which is rock music. I'm a huge fan of so many kinds of rock music and so many artists. But this is the biggest instigator of this episode. And I'm going to flesh it out later on, especially in the conclusions, but I'll touch on it throughout. And it's basically going to say 2 things, more than 2 things. I have no idea, 7 things. Why pick a number? It's going to show how prevalent rock music still is in the culture, despite people saying constantly, and you've heard this since the 60s, 70s, that rock and roll is dead. every few years people say that. And the people who live in the past say it more than anybody else because they think that rock is defined by 80s rock, 90s rock, 70s rock, you name it, 60s rock, instead of what's being made now, which, by the way, is so wide-ranging that even that argument of, oh, this kind of rock doesn't exist is bull. But I'm also going to show how rock music was never actually all that prevalent in the upper echelons of the culture, let's say chart topping and things like that, to begin with. It's been ever present, but not in the way these old white dude rockheads think. And I'm only saying old white dudes because that's me too, so I'm allowed to say that. But people from any demographic are prone to this, like I said. So another topic I'll be doing this season is something called the amalgam effect. I made that up. So it's one of my favorite topics because it's me. It's the kind of music I do. It's the way I listen. It is most of the music I consider my favorite. When you think of some of my favorite artists, like The Cure coming out with a new album, like Prince, like Bowie, like the Beatles, and several others, what's the same about all of them is that they don't stay in one lane either. They explore all kinds of music. If somebody were to say, hey, yeah, The Cure, that's that band that sounds like X, maybe because they heard that one song or one album. But if you listen to all of The Cure, you realize they don't have one specific sound. Neither did any of the other artists I mentioned. And that comes from what I call the amalgam effect. And that is all of those people in all of those bands, artists, whatever, are voracious. They listened to all kinds of music. They let it influence what they were doing. It inspired them to do so many other things with their music. It's why they never stuck to one style or stayed in one lane or just followed a trend or anything like that. It is absolutely what defined rec music. I'm calling Rex music now, my band, multiphasic electro power pop or multiphasic power pop. I haven't landed on it. I think it's multiphasic power pop because it does always have some kind of power and energy. It always has hooks and melodies, and there's the pop element to it, the certain way it's structured. But it goes all over the place, and that's the multiphasic. And so that, to me, is the amalgam effect. When I listen to artists who are retreading, repeating themselves, stuck in an era even, it's probably because they've lost touch with music or are not as voracious. They aren't trying to create an amalgam. Now, I'll say this, though. James McAvoy, I heard an interview with him on Smartless, one of my favorite podcasts, about how he needs and wants and loves to be an eclectic actor, to reinvent himself for every role. And yet, some of his most famous, most favorite actors stay in one lane. They're always themselves in every role they do, and yet they make it work. So there are music artists who do only one thing, but they do it so well, and they have a range within that one thing that, of course, that's also wonderful. That just doesn't happen to be usually my favorite music. Next topic that I absolutely want to do this season is something is about audiophiles, the pros and cons of audiophiles and being an audiophile. I would liken audiophiles, some audiophiles, to people who prize looks over substance. So if you're someone who's out there trolling and you're looking for a date, whatever, and you look at a person and you're judging them solely based on looks and don't care about the substance or only care a little, then you're like a lot of the audiophiles I know who would rather something sound absolutely amazing, 5.1 perfect, stereo surround. You can use all of the terms. I don't really give a shit. And that it was recorded in such a way that everything was pristine, or it had the right amount of grade, or whatever, that there's a perfection there that they think can be achieved, which, by the way, it can't. And care a lot less about the fact that whether or not the songs are good or the performances are good. I mean, I'm sure they care about that stuff to a certain degree too, but they tend to dismiss music that doesn't have a certain level of audiophile quality to it. And there is a lot of music. We're fooling ourselves with this, because I guarantee you, if you listed 10 favorite artists right now, and I don't care what era at this point, I guarantee you one of those artists has done some recording, maybe a lot of it, that doesn't measure up to what you consider your audiophile standards, but you love it anyway. Why? Because the music is awesome, the song is awesome, the performance is awesome, the heart and energy and spirit are there. I believe that audio needs to be of a good enough quality that it gets the ideas across of the song. People can understand it. Beyond that, I don't care. I really don't care. Okay? Those who prize sound quality or nuanced differences over the quality, the composition, and performance, those are the audiophiles I really can't stand. It's like people who think vinyl is superior. Again, it's important to present it well enough, but it's all about communicating and sharing. So, Culture Club is another topic. This was something that patreon.com/music is not a genre fan of mine suggested. And she in particular suggested that I do an episode on just the album Color by Numbers, which is an amazing album. Absolutely amazing. That's their second album. I'll probably do their whole career because I'm super fascinated with Boy George and Culture Club, and we forget what amazing music it was and how many hits there were, honestly. And here's the thing. This is why I bring this up. I'm bringing this up because I said I would talk about all the topics I'm doing this season, or some of them. But I'm also bringing this up because last season, I did 35, 36 main episodes and another maybe 10 mini episodes. I don't know. It was a pretty packed season. And I did them on hip-hop production. I did them on The Kinks. I did them on Duran Duran. I did them on The Wombats. I did them on Beck, The Beatles, The Cure, The Bee Gees. Now, what do those things have in common? They're all music. What else do they have in common? Certain musical principles, but not much else. And that's the whole point of Music is Not a Genre and what I'm doing here. I don't stay in one lane. And doing Culture Club, which is a very, poppy, but a specific kind of pop from the 80s, is not something I've necessarily done before. Yes, I've done Wham and George Michael, and I've done some other, like New Order and Depeche Mode and some of the, new wave, new romantic stuff. But it's just to say that this show goes everywhere. It's one reason it's been a slow build, but it's the kind of build I love. I'm putting a band together again for Rec. We did a show already. We're doing one more this year, 4-piece. By the end of next year, I plan for it to be at least a 6-piece. And it's because I like the slow build. I like things to grow in that way. So that people who love one artist or one kind of music may not like me jumping around. That's what I do. I said it in my teaser. If you're voracious, you're willing to fall in love with any artist or any kind of music. You may not, but you're willing to. This is the podcast you should be listening to. And so Culture Club is a band I bring up when my kids, going back to the topic of this episode, or, Gen Z in general, talk about being non-binary, LGBTQ, IA+, and having representation in all walks of life, including music. And I say, absolutely, and I'm glad there's more of it and that it's more mainstream and it's more accepted, at least in certain circles, and you can feel more comfortable being who you are and being around the people you want to be around, etc., and loving what you love and who you love. But that people, bands and people like Culture Club and Boy George and so many others, they weren't the first, because there were certainly artists before them in the decades before who were maybe quieter about it, who were still of the, non-binary or LGBTQ or anything like that. But they were super prominent in the culture and super out in the 80s. And so if you are a person who doesn't know history and you're like, yeah, but this is now, and look, now is way better than the past. It is. But the past was built on the progress. I mean, the current time was built on the progress that was made in the past, as always. And that includes the 80s, that includes the 90s. And Culture Club was amazingly successful. And there was a lot of gender bending in the 80s and in the 90s. Or ally-based like Depeche Mode, or opportunistic like hair metal, which was pretending to be feminine, but what really a lot of the guys in there were kind of jerks. It shows that generational bias can go both ways. Young people can be biased against older generations, and of course, we know older people can be biased against the younger generations and newer music. And so that's part of what I'm trying to, so that music is not a generation. Music is not a generation. And I think that's a good place to stop, since that's the main topic of this episode. Let you muse on that. Check out the mid-roll, and we'll be back for the second half of this episode in less than a minute. Hey, thanks for checking out this episode of Music is Not a Genre. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, if you'd like to learn more about the music I do with my band Rec, or any other projects, or anything else about me, go to nickdematteo.com. That's Nick, DEMATTEO.com. And everything is there. There's even a link to a merch store where you can get t-shirts and mugs and hats and totes and notebooks and so many other things. I'm always adding new products there. Great way to support the podcast. And finally, go to patreon.com/music is not a genre if you'd really like to show your support. My fans and lovely family there get exclusives and other perks and early releases, and they get to suggest topics for future podcasts as well. Thanks for listening to the mid-roll. Now back to the show. First crossfade of the season, and we are back. Season 7, Episode 1. Thanks for checking out that mid-roll. So another topic I will probably do is that same Patreon supporter who suggested Culture Club, Color by Numbers, also suggested I do a genealogy of King Crimson. And I think she chose that word for a reason. Very specifically, it's not just a discography, which I will probably do anyway, but it's one of those things where it's like, who started King Crimson? What personnel changes happened over the years? Where did they go? So like a little family tree thing. I think Adrian Belew or Robert Fripp, whatever. What other bands did they form, or what other bands were they a part of? Whatever. This person has suggested this. Hi, Amelia, is non-genre like me, and certainly has favorites, but goes everywhere. And even though I was not a huge fan of King Crimson, I've always respected them. I've always been fascinated by them, and so just like I did with King's X last season. Didn't know them well, wasn't a huge fan. But boy, the joy of discovering something, especially when it's out of your wheelhouse, and I know other prog rock, but I don't know King Crimson that well. It's exciting to me that I have that to look forward to. They do have a complicated genealogy and complicated music, and they kind of went in many different places too, which is very cool. Another thing that I'm going to be covering this season is a fun topic others may have done, nepotism. The open door, I don't know what I'm going to subtitle it, how children of successful musicians have done. And it might be somebody like, James McCartney, or I don't know, now I'm blanking, but I guarantee you there are a ton of musicians out there, just like actors, who you think came out of nowhere, but who are, children of more famous musicians or somebody from another artistic profession. And here's my take on this, just so you know, and I'll flesh it out in the episode. Anyone who is lucky enough to have the privilege of nepotism has one thing, which is a shot. The door has been opened for you in almost every case. You have a shot at making a career, a shot at making a mark, a shot at making a living, a shot at being some kind of a success. Many of us do not believe, when I did that whole give me $50,000 and all that stuff, and one of the things I made, don't believe the American dream. That was created in, I believe, the 19th century by somebody who wanted people to work factories. And as much as I'd like to have hope, and I do have hope despite myself, the idea that we all have the same opportunity to rise up in the world is bullshit. And especially in today's culture and market, where the division is so vast between the haves and have-nots. So if you are someone who has, whether it's money or connections, or nepotism or whatever, what you have is a shot. Now, does that mean I dislike you? No, not at all. There's some amazing, like Chris Pine. Love Chris Pine. His father was an actor. Whatever. There are so many people who I love, whose parents or grandparents and all of that were in the business. But they did something with their shot. They developed their talent. They had talent. They used their talent to great effect. and they persevered. They persevered, and they didn't just squander it. So while many of us struggle our lives to get that kind of opportunity, and it can happen, you can generate it one way or another. Usually it's more through connections than through talent, but that's fine. It's fortunate for them and wonderful that they've taken that opportunity and done something with it. I guarantee you there are far more children of artists, musicians, whatever, who have not succeeded. Now I'm thinking about Zach Starkey and people like that. Yeah. But he has succeeded. That just popped into my head, who had their shot and either didn't take it or didn't do with it what they could have done, or maybe just didn't have that certain level of talent. So I'm not saying that open door is the only key to success. It's just something I think is going to be super, super interesting to delve into. And also kind of points up the generational divide thing, which I happen to believe very strongly is bullshit, as I've been saying. Another thing that I'll probably do, another holdover from last season's topics that I didn't get to, that I should, which is, what country music do I even like? You know, I talk out of both sides of my body about not being biased and all that. And of course, we all have opinions, so that's fine. But I talk about how I'm open, right? And yet, my entire life, I've had this aversion to much of country music, not all of it. So I guess I am putting my money where my mouth is. There's certain kinds of country that I do really enjoy, and certain eras of country I really enjoy, and even certain more modern things that I like, that I've put on playlists and that I've, played for my wife, and she's like, "Oh, I didn't know you listen to that kind of music." Well, that's the question. I'd like to break down all the kinds of country music and find out, really, really, discover, investigate, what country music do I really like? Why do I like it? And why can I not stand other kinds of country music? And my hope is that I will attract country music fans who can tell me, "Oh, well, yeah, you say you can't stand that, but if you listen to such and such, you'll really like it." And then I'll discover something new. Or other fans who are like, "Yeah, I totally see what you mean. I like the, alt country, or I like certain kinds of folk," or whatever it is. And we kind of have something in common. Either way, I love it when you disagree with me. I love it when you agree with me. Something else I might get into this season. And by the way, this is going to be a bit of a shorter episode than normal, which is a great way to start a season anyway. I may delve into certain aspects of music theory. I was a teacher, a private music teacher, for about a decade. So I know my theory shit inside and out. I taught theory. I taught chord theory as well. I taught piano and guitar and bass and vocals and things like that. I don't go much into it here except in passing. There are other podcasters who will take one song and dissect it, and I love that. That for some reason is not something that is much of an interest for me to do as it is to, honestly, I haven't listened to it much either, so who's fooling who? But I believe that I'm going to do a couple of episodes on certain aspects of music theory, such as the prevalence of and effectiveness of the 1-4 chord progression. So if you're in C major to F major, why is that so effective? Especially for me, why is it so gripping? Why, if that 4 is then turned to a minor, does it have a different effect, and a wonderful effect that really pulls you in? As opposed to, say, the 1-5 progression, which is very stentorian in a way, and yet also very effective for what it needs to do. By the way, I listened to another podcast, name-checking podcast. Why not? Secretly Incredibly Fascinating. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with that podcast, but I do love many of their topics. And they just did one on Pachelbel's Canon in D. And to me, talk about love-hate, they showed how you can take a tangent too far. They were saying, okay, here's the progression, the chord progression of Pachelbel's Canon in D. And then here are songs that have used that. Now, there are some where it is 100% certain it's the exact chord progression. They do other things in there, little Rococo, Baroque things that show that that was the inspiration, was that song, right? I'm not going to say the chord progression here. But then there are others where they're like, oh, what about Basket Case by Green Day? It's close. It's not exact. How far are you going to take this tangent to say that it was inspired by that? It was inspired by the idea of that chord progression. It doesn't mean it was inspired by that particular song. And I think that one thing I will bring to my talk about theory is I'm not going to take it too far. I'm not going to be the person that says, Danny California sounds like the Tom Petty song, and so it was a ripoff. Tom Petty didn't even care about that. There were similarities. Does that mean that it was an exact duplicate? No. And I think it's important to know that we all take from other things. It's what we do with it that makes a difference. And that I may even do an episode on chord theory in general, not just the 1/4. And that's kind of been talking about chord theory in general. That's why I brought this up. Circle of fifths is an exciting thing and blah, blah, blah. And the reason being, chords connect almost every single kind of Western music, and even most of non-Western music. I mean, there's atonal music, there's quarter tone, there's 12 tone, all of that stuff. But in general, most of the music you hear on any given day is connected through chords. And there were times where I was learning classical music, which I never got as good as I wanted to on the piano, but did fairly well. And I would break down certain harder songs by analyzing them and finding out what the chords were. So my head would say, oh, your fingers need to be on that progression, whether it's arpeggiated or not. And when I write, I don't always preconceive the chord progression. Sometimes this comes out of me, but I make sure I know what it is, partly because I will have to perform it at some point or tell others how to perform it and write the chord charts out for them, but also because I'm just fascinated. And there's certain types of progressions that convey certain things, that might even get me to love a song in a genre I don't like country. If it uses a certain chord progression where I'm like, oh man, that really got me. So effective. It might pull me in. Another topic I might do this season, how Germany has had this stealth importance in the development of modern music and maybe rock, electronic, and you go on and on and on. And I don't want to get too far into it because I'll do a whole episode on it. But the idea there being that so many other topics I've done, whether it's, electronic music or Bowie or U2, there's a certain connection to Germany, even the Beatles. What is it about Germany over the last 60 years, really, maybe longer, that has so influenced so much of Western music? We know, okay, British music has influenced American music and vice versa. Certain kinds of music from other countries has influenced all of that. Blues music has influenced, stuff around the world. Hip-hop takes its cues from so many different kinds of music, and that we are more or less aware of. We don't think of, Italy influenced disco with the way they produce things, etc. We don't think a lot about Germany and what they did for music, and not in just one genre. And it also makes my usual point that the United States has way more biases and prejudices and difficulty genre hopping and generation hopping than so many other countries. It's amazing to me when I talk to people from other countries, and I unfortunately haven't traveled as much as I like, but I know from other people who have traveled who will say that they'll go to, for example, England is a perfect example. And Oasis is back together and blah, blah, blah. We think of Oasis as a 90s band. They released successful albums in the 2000s, some of which hit the charts here, but all of which were popular in Britain. Why? Because they don't, in general, and it's a generalization, have as short an attention span as we do here. We don't think of an artist as locked into one era. We think of an artist as a free-floating, or they think of an artist as a free-floating entity that can exist whenever they're doing music and will appreciate their music if they're still doing good stuff and putting it out there. And it's why when I watched that documentary on Camden, the Camden in Britain, in London, it was amazing to me, again, how many genres grew up there, but how it went over about 50 years of music and showed that there were people there of all ages who were appreciating music from all those different decades and all that thing. And it's not to say there aren't people in the States who do that. Of course there are. I'm one of them. But I think our culture discourages thinking about older artists as being equals, or the newer music that older artists making as being as good as some of it. Because a lot of times, some of the later stuff that we don't know as well is just as good as the stuff they did when they were famous. So I don't know, you know, and to me, talking about Germany will kind of show, I believe, that there's a culture there musically that is possibly as open as Britain, where it doesn't discriminate based on how old a song is or an artist or what kind of music it is. Another topic I'd love to do is which artists are so essential to the pantheon, that's the network I'm part of, podcasting network, of music, of the world of music, that their absence would have changed the face of music entirely. I think I probably came up with this years ago when I was thinking of that show, that movie Yesterday, where the Beatles didn't exist. I think that's what it was called. And it was a pretty good movie. It could have been better, but it was fun. And the idea that they didn't capitalize on how music would have changed in the world if the Beatles didn't exist. They should have had examples there of it sounding different. Because I believe the Beatles are one of those artists. I believe Prince is one of those artists. And I'll, you know, again, when I do the research for this topic, I'll come out with a bunch more. There are artists who have come and gone who have influenced maybe some other artists, but the general landscape of music wouldn't have changed much if they didn't exist. And I'm curious about the ones that would have changed the landscape entirely if they were, you know, It's a Wonderful Life out of existence. Just a sampling of some of the topics I'm starting with or going to get to in this season 7, and I welcome your suggestions for other topics big time. Patreon.com/music is not a genre. What are some conclusions here in this episode? I said I would get to this, and here it is. I started this topic because of this rock bias. And depending on the circumstances, when someone I'm talking to, whether it's in person, one-to-one, or, you know, in real time, I'll say, it could be on the phone or online, or someone I'm listening to in a podcast, goes into how music was so much better way back when, and pick a date, pick a decade, because it's always different. I either just kind of nod my head nicely and tune out and lose interest, or find an agreement and say, like, oh, I loved such and such band, and, you know, to show that I get why they like that era, but I'm not in a mood or a place to get into, you know, maybe I don't know them well enough, or it's not the right time, whatever it is, or the mood is a certain way. We're all pretty happy. Why bring it down? To really say, why is it that you think that music was better then as opposed to now? But sometimes I'm in that mood, and this episode is that mood. Again, I will say there's been almost the same mix of music in the last 50 years. The only differences, and you need to listen to this. And some of the people I'm talking about, those names I won't name, do agree with this. And so I'm going to give them credit for that, of course. And you may too. But the differences are what hits the charts. What hits the charts can often delude us into thinking that's the only music that's out there, when in fact, there's so much more. The music we think is gone is somewhere. We just haven't taken the time to find it. And yeah, we might be sad that it's not as popular as we want it to be, or that we think it once was, which, by the way, I will say again, rock music has almost never dominated the charts, not in any decade. It dominated it most, to be frank, in the 2000s, believe it or not, than in any other decade. And you can, you know, scan the charts even more and tell me if I'm wrong. It's been present in the charts for the last 60 years, in one degree, 60, 70 years, whatever. But it has not, and almost never, dominated the charts, pop music and other things. And of course now hip hop and electronic music in particular. B, the other difference in the eras of music is what you choose to focus on, and whether or not you are stuck in the past. So you might think of, I'm going to use the 80s as an example. And if back then you were a fan of, let's say, I don't know, Motley Crue and Poison and all of those bands, or if you were a fan of Run DMC and Public Enemy and Beastie Boys or whatever, you pick your genre and you will say that's when that type of music was the best. and it existed the most. But did it? Because there were so many other kinds of music back then that you maybe weren't listening to that existed just as much that you just tuned out because it wasn't your thing. And I have done a lot of research in a lot of eras and a lot of topics, and I have found zero empirical evidence that one era held all the genius for any genre. Now, I did an episode on the main, this genre peaked in this decade, and I did one for each decade, but I used certain criteria that all had to match, which was the charts, the culture, the quality. That doesn't mean that the quality diminished it just meant that all three of those hit at the same time. Point one that I'm making here is that rock is still alive. Assholes. It's still out there. Young people are making rock. Old people are making rock. If that's your whole thing, if all you love is rock music, it's out there. So stop saying it's not. And I'm not talking about rock hybrid bands like Imagine Dragons or Baby Metal or whatever, or have that kind of pop, or I'm not even talking about the various country rock artists who are wonderful. That's great. I mean actual straight ahead rock of the kind that you think is the only rock that is worth anything. Or of all those genres and subgenres, whether it's metal or hard rock of some kind or indie or post-punk or whatever it is. It's all out there. And it's all still being made. New stuff or new stuff by older artists. It's all out there. And I'm even setting aside legacy bands like Fall Out Boy, Taking Back Sunday, Mastodon, Metallica, The Cure, Paramore, Smashing Pumpkins, all of whom still put out new music, by the way. I'm setting those aside. I'm talking about recent bands showing that younger generations are still super into rock. And again, I can make this argument about country and hip hop and pop and electronic. I'm picking rock because most of the bias seems to exist in that fucking world, and it pisses me off. I say all this, again, not because I think the differences really matter, because they don't. All the genres can be whatever, equal. But because I think you think they do. Asshole. I love using that word. Spoiler alert, I know this might upset you, but a lot of the people making rock music today, they're not just white dudes. Some of them are. You know, I still make rock music, and I'm people much younger than I am. It was never always just white dudes, but they kind of dominated for a lot of time. You have bands like Wolf Alice, Meet Me at the Altar, Linda Lindas, by the way, saw in concert, and they kicked ass. Also saw Emil and the Sniffers, and they kicked ass. Mannequin Pussy, who I believe is from Philly. Brat, not Charlie XCX, the band Brat. Alt Black Era, Gel, Zulu, Black Gold, which is new metal. Bonginator, Burner, Dungeon Serpent, and Beyond Metal and Hardcore. These are all relatively new bands doing lots of rock music of all kinds, and there's a lot of emo out there and screamo and you name it. It's just all of it is still out there. Point two, rock, again, was almost never dominant in mainstream culture. We just remember it wrong. Doing the albums by decade, I was shocked to see that rock music was largely and also ran in its time. Charts for each year from the 1960s on at that time, not subsequent sales. Those numbers have changed. But if you check out my album series, which there is a playlist on YouTube for that, or just look up what's an album and why, music is not a genre, do a survey of top albums, total sales for each year from 1960 on, maybe 65 years. Only 15 of those 65 years, depending on how you define who rock is, or who is rock, was a rock album the biggest seller of the year. Only 15 of those 65 years. Back to main point about generations before I conclude. Notice how genre and generation and gender all have the same root word, and all are often used to divide rather than connect. I love how they can categorize and give you a shorthand, but if you're using them to divide, when all of us and all of it, music and whatever, are connected, I personally think that sucks. I think that if you're good at what you do, podcasters, in this case, both knowing music, which you seem to, and talking about it, which you're variably good at, you don't need to cater to the lowest common denominator. It's easy to generate responses and fans by drumming up bias and hatred and division. We love it. Rage baiting. Some podcasters lean into this heavily when it's clear that their skill, intelligence, and knowledge go well beyond that. So use it. And the secondary point, first of all, it's often about race, whether they want to say it or not. Rock wouldn't exist. Most kinds of music, all music is black music. I did an episode called that. All music from the last 100 and some 50 years, whatever, has been influenced by black music in the Western world and beyond. All right. It's one thing to have a preference for certain kinds of music. We all do. It's another to claim that music is worse because the charts have been dominated by, let's say, hip hop, R&B, and pop since the mid 80s, which is true. I'm sorry, you may not like that music, but to be that adamant about it, there's a racist component to it. Listen, I admit I am not super strategic when it comes to programming. It's why I don't have millions of followers. Not that I won't someday, but I don't at the moment. I talk about what I like, what interests me, even if it's something I don't know, like King Crimson or King's X, all the Kings, whatever. I know that other podcasters talk about what they like too, and that's great. But I don't shoot for one demographic other than, again, voracious music lovers who don't stay in one lane. But I will take being less popular if it means I maintain the stance that new music is as good as old music, because it is, that hip-hop is as good as rock, because it is, that labels and categories can be used to bring people together instead of divide them, because they can. And honestly, fucking honest, do we really need more people sticking up for the past in any way, shape, or form? Talk about it. Talk about the wonderful things about it. But sticking up for it against the present is idiotic, and I'm tired of it. And I still reserve the right to be annoyed and pissed at people who cater to trolls. If you love rock as much as you say you do, go out of your way to find it from wherever and from whenever, including today. And if you love some other genre and you think that heyday, like 90s hip-hop heyday, fine. I love 90s hip-hop. There's amazing hip-hop being made today. Go find it. Even if you're like, I don't like, Tierra Whack, whatever, whack. There's plenty of other kinds of hip-hop being made that you will find something that you like. But the reason why I've used rock is because, honestly, old white dudes are the worst. They just are. They always have been. That brings me to my bonus extra video topic, which patreon.com/music is not a genre. That's where you can find it. And that is, I'm going to name names. I'm going to talk about who I'm talking about in the podcasting world. Two guys super successful on YouTube as music podcasters. I talk about why they're successful, what I like about them, and what pisses me off. That is the bonus extra video at patreon.com/music is not a genre, which brings me to the final thing, the featured song. By the way, I'll be putting a lot more rec into my episodes because one of the reasons I do this podcast is to promote my own music. And please go to nickdimatteo.com/music and find out all about rec and the music I do. It's also because Rec's new album is coming out soon in the fall of 2024. Kite to Camden is the name of the album. You get a free copy of it if you can tell me why I named it that. And I'll dedicate an entire episode to Rec's development into the album when it comes out, showing how I've come up with a cohesive sound from an amalgam, amazingly disparate influences. And the featured song I'm using is from that album. It is an unreleased song. I haven't released it as a single. The album hasn't come out. It's called You Know You're Right. It's inspired by Lenny Kravitz and other kinds of rock like that. Also G-Love, so there's a little hip-hop inspiration. There's some glam rock in there as well. The lyrics came from, and you're going to hear it in about 30 to 60 seconds, I worked with a production partner for a number of years. We broke up, quote unquote, because he called me pushy and manipulative, which those are lyrics in this song, by the way. And it pissed me off that we squandered something that could have reached great heights because of something that was going on with that guy. And it's kind of apropos for the topic of this episode that I'm talking about a strident song when I have been kind of strident here, admittedly so. And I kind of find that fun. It's not streaming anywhere. Only way you get to hear it is by sticking around for about 30 more seconds. Questions: where do you fall on the generational bias spectrum? Do you only like and respect the music from your favorite era and hate others? Do you lean that way but are open to music from other eras, though you might not seek it out? Do you actively seek out new music? Are you a mix of all of those? I hope this episode sparks huge debate because, as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging out for Season 7, Episode 1, and I will talk to you next week.
This was supposed to be a two-headed team, but people aren't always what they seem. You know I'm right. We had a good thing and he threw it away. I had a feeling I'd see the day. Oh my, no fun. No. Just to stay in your head. Why did you even get out of bed? Stay home. 'Cause you're no fun. It's not a pessimistic sixth sense. It's free your mind and don't be dense. Look to the blinding light when you know you're right. You know I'm right. And it's no fun, no fun. I hate to be right. I love to be right. I hate to be right. But I love to be right. No fun when I'm right. But I struggle when I'm right. No, I struggle when I'm right. I struggle when I'm right. Hidden suspicions, you're afraid to believe. Can't keep on wishing when it's too plain to see. I just want the truth, don't want another fight. But you don't need the proof when you know you're right. What you say? You said I'm pushy. What you say? Said I'm manipulative. I'm so pushy. Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm so manipulative. That's what you said. That's what you said. You said I'm pushy. Said I'm manipulative. I might be pushy. Might be manipulative. But you know what else I am? I'm right.